The night had dressed itself in brilliance. Yet for her it had become a theatre of quiet cruelty. Beneath the chandeliers of Carlton House, where crystal flames trembled like captive stars, she stood keenly aware of every whisper that curved through the air behind gloved hands. She had been born to gentility and taught its manners as one learns prayer, but poverty clung to her now like a stain that even silk could not disguise. The recent severing of her engagement had rendered her not merely unprotected, but suspect, and in Regency England suspicion was a sharper blade than truth. Each passing look weighed her worth, each smile measured her fall. She moved through the levee with practiced composure, her spine straight, her expression serene, though humiliation beat fiercely beneath the calm of her countenance. The Prince Regent's household glittered with power and indulgence, yet for those without fortune, its corridors offered no refuge. She felt the presence of her former betrothed long before she saw him, as one senses an approaching storm. The baronet's voice, smooth and familiar, carried too easily through the crowd, and with it came the memory of promises soured into threats. He had released her with public courtesy and private malice, and now he pursued her not with love, but with ownership wounded. She turned as discreetly as she could, hoping to lose herself among the rank and fashion of the evening, but his gaze followed with patient certainty. Every step she took tightened the invisible net between them. She understood, with sudden clarity, that the rules governing this glittering world would not protect her should he choose to speak too loudly or smile too knowingly. Reputation was a currency she could not afford to lose, and yet it was slipping from her grasp with every breath. When he moved closer, she felt fear rise, sharp and undeniable, and instinct overcame decorum. Excusing herself with a murmured apology, she slipped from the main assembly into the adjoining passages reserved for private movement and royal convenience. The sounds of music and laughter dulled behind her, replaced by the hush of thick carpets and shadowed walls. She did not know where she was going, only that she must not be found alone with him. Her heart pounded as she passed closed doors and half-lit antechambers, her steps hastened by the knowledge that pursuit would follow. The grandeur that had dazzled moments before now loomed like a maze designed to entrap rather than delight. At the far end of a corridor, she saw a door slightly ajar, lamplight spilling warmly across the polished floor. Believing it to be an unused retiring chamber, she grasped the handle without hesitation and slipped inside, drawing the door closed behind her with a trembling hand. For one breathless instant, relief washed through her, fragile and fleeting. Then she looked up. The room was not empty. A gentleman stood near the hearth, his back partially turned, removing the embroidered coat of court dress with deliberate care. The rich fabric caught the light, and so did the unmistakable authority in his bearing. He turned at the sound of her startled breath, and their eyes met in mutual astonishment. She recognized him at once, though they had never been formally introduced. The Duke of Ashcombe was known even beyond the circles of power for his gravity and discretion, a widowed peer whose loyalty to the crown had earned him a place among the Prince Regent's advisers. His expression, controlled yet keen, betrayed no impropriety, only surprise sharpened by assessment. For her part, mortification threatened to undo her entirely, and she curtsied at once, words failing her as she struggled to explain herself. Before any explanation could be offered, footsteps sounded outside the door, deliberate and unmistakable. The Duke's gaze flicked briefly toward the sound, then returned to her face, where fear had eclipsed embarrassment. In that moment, he understood enough. She did not plead, nor did she move closer, but the stillness of her posture spoke of desperation mastered by pride. The door handle turned, and the baronet entered without invitation, his confident smile faltering as he took in the scene before him. The balance of the evening shifted in a heartbeat, and scandal hovered, breathless and expectant. The silence that followed was taut as drawn wire, every breath measured, every glance a potential calamity. The baronet recovered himself quickly, bowing with practiced ease, yet the sharp calculation in his eyes betrayed his intent. He spoke with feigned surprise, remarking upon the unexpected intimacy of the chamber, his tone light enough to wound without appearing cruel. She felt the weight of his insinuation settle upon her shoulders, the unspoken accusation hovering between them like smoke. To be found thus, unchaperoned, was peril enough. To be found thus with a duke was ruin of a different order. Before she could summon her voice, the Duke of Ashcombe stepped forward. His movements were unhurried, his expression composed, yet authority radiated from him as heat from a banked fire. He addressed the baronet with cool civility, naming the lady as his invited guest, there at his request, under his protection. The words were delivered with such calm assurance that contradiction seemed vulgar. In an instant, the narrative of the evening shifted, and the baronet found himself an intruder rather than a claimant. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by a thin smile that failed to disguise his resentment. The Duke's declaration hung in the air, irrevocable and resonant. She stared at him, scarcely believing what she had heard, her fate altered by a sentence spoken on her behalf without consultation or condition. The baronet murmured an apology, stiff and insincere, and withdrew under the weight of the Duke's steady gaze. When the door closed behind him, the chamber felt suddenly smaller, the intimacy no longer imposed by threat but by consequence. She turned to the Duke, her gratitude tangled with alarm, and attempted to speak, but emotion caught her voice. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a matter already settled, and assured her that her reputation would suffer no injury on his account. Yet he did not soften the truth that his intervention would provoke scrutiny. Society, he observed, was never content with simple explanations. She met his eyes then, searching for judgment and finding none, only a sober awareness of responsibility accepted. Her composure, frayed but unbroken, seemed to please him, and he remarked quietly upon her courage, a compliment that struck deeper than flattery. They did not linger. He escorted her back into the public rooms with measured propriety, offering his arm as though it had always been intended. The return drew attention at once, and whispers bloomed like frost along the edges of conversation. She felt their passage marked by curiosity and conjecture, yet his presence steadied her, lending weight to her step and dignity to her bearing. The Duke's name carried authority, and for the first time that evening, she was not alone beneath the gaze of society. By the following morning, the story had transformed in every retelling. Some spoke of a clandestine understanding long concealed, others of a reckless impropriety hastily redeemed. Pamphlets hinted, drawing-rooms speculated, and the baronet's silence was taken as proof of injured pride. She woke to a world altered, her name tethered to the Duke's with a firmness that startled her. Though no word had passed between them since the night before, she felt his decision pressing upon her future with quiet inevitability. When the Duke sent for her, the summons was respectful, conveyed through proper channels, yet its implication was unmistakable. She attended him in the afternoon, her nerves held in careful restraint, aware that every step toward his residence carried her further from the life she had known. He received her in a modest sitting-room, free of ostentation, and invited her to speak freely. She thanked him, formally and sincerely, acknowledging the sacrifice his action might demand. He listened without interruption, his attention complete, as though her words alone commanded the room. At last, he spoke of duty. His position, he explained, required him to guard not only his own honor but that of those placed under his protection. He did not regret his choice, yet he would not pretend its implications were light. The gossip, already fervent, would soon demand resolution. He offered it plainly then, marriage, not born of passion, but of mutual preservation. His tone was steady, his expression grave, as though proposing a treaty rather than a union. She absorbed the proposal in silence, her thoughts a tumult beneath her calm exterior. Marriage had once promised security and affection, and then betrayal. To accept now felt both refuge and risk, yet refusal carried its own perils. She looked at him, truly looked, seeing not only power but restraint, not only authority but a careful respect. The choice before her was stark, yet not without dignity. As she met his gaze, the future opened uncertainly between them, and though no answer passed her lips, the moment bound them together in expectation, inviting what must follow. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, deliberate quiet, as though the world itself paused to observe the consequences of their near scandal. She accepted the Duke's proposal with measured resolve, not from romantic surrender but from a clear-eyed understanding of survival, and the announcement was made with restrained formality that satisfied society without feeding it. Yet beneath the calm surface of their arrangement stirred an undercurrent neither had anticipated. Removed from the glare of ballrooms and gossip, they encountered one another in moments unguarded, where pretense gave way to truth. She came to know his household not as a fortress of power, but as a place shaped by absence. The late Duchess lingered in the arrangement of books, the choice of flowers, the careful order of rooms that had once held laughter. He spoke of her rarely, but when he did, it was with reverence unmarred by sentimentality, revealing a man who honored devotion without indulging in display. She listened, not with jealousy, but with respect, recognizing grief as a testament to depth rather than an obstacle to affection. In turn, he observed her with increasing attention. Her manners were impeccable, yet never hollow. Her speech carried intelligence sharpened by experience rather than study alone. She did not seek to charm, nor did she retreat into meekness, and this balance intrigued him more than beauty ever had. During long walks across the estate grounds, she spoke candidly of her childhood, of lessons learned beside a dwindling hearth, of dignity preserved even as comfort faded. He found in her words a quiet courage that demanded no applause. Their conversations unfolded slowly, like pages turned with care. By the fire in the evenings, they spoke of governance and conscience, of a nation reshaping itself after war, of the unyielding structures that both protected and punished. She questioned him without insolence, and he answered without condescension, surprised to find in her a mind that challenged rather than deferred. In these exchanges, the terms of their marriage subtly shifted, no longer confined to protection and propriety, but edging toward partnership. Yet restraint governed them still. He maintained a courteous distance, mindful of vows that had not yet been spoken, and she honored that boundary with equal resolve. Their proximity was charged not with urgency, but with anticipation, each aware of a growing attachment that neither dared to name. When their hands brushed in passing, the contact was brief, yet it echoed longer than either would admit. They were learning one another in fragments, assembling trust piece by careful piece. One evening, as rain traced silver paths along the windows, she found him unusually withdrawn. Papers lay untouched upon his desk, and the familiar composure of his bearing was strained. She hesitated, then spoke his name softly, an intimacy still new upon her tongue. He looked up, and in his eyes she saw weariness unshielded by rank. He confessed, haltingly, his fear that he had bound her to a life of scrutiny and sacrifice, that his choice, though meant to protect, might yet confine her. Her reply came without hesitation. She told him she had lived long within the confines of expectation, and that security without respect was a harsher prison than any scandal. What he had offered her was not merely shelter, but the dignity of being chosen as worthy. Her voice did not tremble, but the honesty of it moved him more than tears might have done. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that duty alone no longer governed their union. He rose then, pacing briefly as though weighing words that carried consequence. When he stopped before her, his expression held neither command nor reserve, only sincerity stripped bare. He admitted that her presence had unsettled him, not as an obligation, but as a comfort he had not known he lacked. Still, he held himself back, insisting that affection must never be assumed where choice had been constrained. The respect in that restraint deepened her regard immeasurably. They stood in silence, the fire crackling between them, each aware that the threshold of confession had been crossed, even if declaration had not. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, fragile yet steady, born not of fantasy but of recognition. He offered his arm as he always did, yet this time the gesture carried new meaning, a promise implicit rather than spoken. As she rested her hand upon his sleeve, she knew the course of their lives had shifted once more, and the future, though uncertain, no longer felt endured but awaited. The crisis came not with raised voices, but with silence, for society's sharpest weapons were often wielded discreetly. Rumor returned to London with renewed vigor, carried by letters and lingering glances, until even the Duke's standing trembled beneath its weight. The baronet re-emerged, not in pursuit of her affection, but of revenge, hinting publicly that honor had been manufactured to conceal ambition. Parliament whispered, the Prince Regent observed, and Ashcombe understood that neutrality was no longer possible. To protect his name required distance, yet to abandon her would confirm every cruelty she had endured. The stakes sharpened with passing hour. She learned of the danger through omission rather than alarm, noticing the Duke's careful pauses and the guarded expressions of those who served him. When he finally spoke, his candor was unadorned, explaining that forces beyond affection now pressed upon them both. She listened without interruption, her hands folded, her composure unwavering, though fear stirred beneath her calm. This marriage, once a refuge, now demanded courage of a different kind. She refused to be sheltered by silence and insisted on standing beside him openly, whatever judgment followed. In that resolve, he recognized an equal, not burden, nor fragile companion ever. The confrontation came in a drawing-room filled with polite witnesses, where cruelty wore courtesy like a mask. The baronet spoke carefully, questioning motives and virtue, implying transactions rather than devotion. Ashcombe listened until the insinuations threatened her dignity, then answered with measured clarity. He named her his wife in intent, his partner in conscience, and declared that protection had become affection through knowledge, not convenience. She felt the room still as his words dismantled the narrative crafted against her, replacing speculation with certainty and command. No one challenged him, least of all her accuser. Silence sealed the moment permanently. Afterward, they departed London together, not in triumph, but in quiet resolve, retreating from spectacle to truth. The estate received them with early spring, its fields softened by green promise and rain. There, away from scrutiny, they prepared for marriage without performance or excess. She chose simplicity, he offered steadiness, and together they shaped a union defined by consent rather than necessity. Each day revealed habits, preferences, and temperaments, and affection grew not in grand gestures, but in shared routines and unguarded laughter. Trust settled between them like something earned, lasting. It reshaped their understanding of home and belonging entirely. On the morning of their wedding, no crowd gathered to witness spectacle, only a few chosen souls bearing quiet loyalty. She stood before him without fear, her past no longer a weight, but a testament. When vows were spoken, they were neither hurried nor rehearsed, but deliberate and clear. He promised regard before authority, she promised honesty before obedience. In that exchange, the last remnants of scandal lost their power, replaced by a bond forged deliberately, in daylight rather than shadow. Even the air seemed to soften around them, as if acknowledging a justice restored at last for them both. The world did not change overnight, nor did society abandon its appetite for judgment, but its voice grew fainter. Ashcombe resumed his duties with renewed clarity, guided now by a partnership that strengthened rather than constrained him. She assumed her place beside him with humility unmarred by submission, earning regard through presence and intellect. Together they navigated obligation with care, choosing integrity when convenience beckoned. Their marriage did not silence criticism entirely, but it rendered it irrelevant, stripped of authority by lived example. Respect followed them, slow but undeniable, earned through consistency rather than performance, and patience proved its worth. In private, tenderness emerged without announcement, revealed in small, intentional acts. He learned the cadence of her moods, she the quiet weight of his responsibilities. They spoke honestly of fears not previously permitted, and found relief in being known. Love arrived not as a fever, but as a certainty, steady and sustaining. She no longer questioned her place, and he no longer guarded his solitude. What began in defense had become devotion, shaped by trust and chosen daily. Each morning reaffirmed the vow they never regretted, built from respect, hardship, and mutual recognition, rather than illusion or desperate hope alone. Years later, memory softened the sharpness of that night at Carlton House, yet its meaning endured. From humiliation had risen clarity, from threat had come choice. She sometimes reflected upon the girl she had been, cornered and frightened, and felt compassion rather than shame. He regarded that moment as the turning of his life, when duty had opened into purpose. Together, they honored the past not as wound, but as foundation, bearing witness to resilience shaped by circumstance. Their story lived quietly, unrecorded except in character, and in choices repeated when no audience watched, which mattered most to them always. Thus, what society had named scandal transformed into legacy, not of notoriety, but of quiet reform. Their union altered little in law, yet much in example, proving that honor could be reclaimed through integrity rather than spectacle. Those who observed them learned, if only privately, that dignity might survive judgment. She carried herself with earned confidence, he with softened authority. In their steadiness, the rigid world glimpsed a gentler order, subtle yet persistent. Change rarely announced itself, but it endured nonetheless. They embodied its possibility without demanding recognition or applause from those once eager to condemn their earlier misfortune entirely. In the end, there was no triumph louder than peace, no victory grander than mutual regard. The Duke and Duchess moved forward not as symbols, but as people shaped by consequence and choice. Love, when it arrived, had done so honestly, without spectacle or haste. What began in flight had concluded in belonging. Their story closed not upon certainty, but upon confidence earned together, and in that assurance, they found a future neither had once believed possible. It stood as testament to patience, dignity, and deliberate hope, quietly resisting the cruelty of its age, with grace learned through trial enduring.